Hi everyone, welcome to this very interesting conversation today with Pushpesh Kumar and Sayantan Datta on community category in the state. And we are going to talk about Hijras in contemporary queer discourse. This is also based on their latest paper, which was published in the Indian Journal of Gender Studies. So let me very quickly introduce Professor Pushpesh Kumar, who teaches sociology at the University of Hyderabad and has written extensively on gender and sexuality issues. He has published an edited volume titled Sexuality, Abjection, and Queer Existence in Contemporary India with Routledge, New York, Delhi in 2022. His co-edited volume, Sociology of Gender in India, is forthcoming soon with Cambridge University Press. He also serves on the International Advisory Committee of the Community Development Journal and has served as a member of the editorial committee of the Sociological Bulletin and on the advisory committee of the Indian Journal of Gender Studies. Pushpesh Kumar was invited by the South Asia Center, Syracuse University, Syracuse, to share his research on queering Indian sociology in 2017. He received the M. N. Srinivas Memorial Prize for Young Sociologist of the Indian Sociological Society for his essay, Gender and Procreative Ideologies Among the Columns of Maharashtra, which was published in the Contributions to Indian Sociology. Under the British Academy Fellowship, he was a visiting fellow at the Department of Anthropology, London School of Economics and Political Science in 2009. He was also a visiting fellow at the Center of the Studies of Social Systems, CSSS, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and the Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics, DSE in 2018. He was recently offered an honorary visiting professorship by the Impact and Policy Research Institute, Delhi. He, along with Sayantan and Neha Mishra from Krea University, is the guest editor of a special volume, Queer and Trans Community Building in Post Nalsa and Post 377 India, published in the recent issue of the Community Development Journal, OUP, UK and Ireland. I now welcome Dipali to introduce our other speaker, Sayantan Datta.
Thank you, Rituparna. I'll take this opportunity to very quickly introduce Sayantan. Sayantan Datta is an assistant professor of practice at the Center for Writing and Pedagogy, Krea University, and an independent journalist associated with queerbeat and the Labhopping Science Media Forum. Their research and writing interests include gender, sexuality, caste, health, and science. The work has been published in several national and international peer reviewed journals, books, and media platforms. Their notable contributions include co editing with Pushpesh Kumar and Neha Mishra a special issue of Oxford University Press's Community Development Journal on queer and transgender community building in post Nalsa and post 377 India, and a landmark multi site study on the lived experiences of queer, transgender, and intersex people in India's science institutions. Sayantan's work has been supported by grants and fellowships from the National Association for Science Writers in the USA, the UK Research Initiative's Transforming Education for Sustainable Futures project, the Reframe Institute for Arts and Expression, and the Foundation for Advancement of Science and Technology India. They have been awarded the 13th Ladli Media and Advertising Award for Gender Sensitivity and the inaugural Sage Ashoka Prize for Critical Writing Pedagogies with Vivek Tiwari. Their children's books have also been twice listed in Tata Trust's Parag Honor list. So, welcome, Sayantan, and welcome, Professor Pushpesh. Very happy to have you both for this discussion. Uh, to sort of start off this conversation, I'd like to begin with a question on, how the queer studies often critiques fixed identity categories. So, how does the Hijra community complicate the politics of identity-based recognition in contemporary India?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this question. So, yes, I say that queer and queering stand for destabilizing and celebrating indeterminacy of bodies and identities. And in certain ways, the Hijra performativity of Hijra identity apparently goes against the spirit of queer subjectivity in the sense that Hijra identity is iterative and citational. to use Judith Butler's idea of repetitiveness of gender performances. The Hijra both, as per the norms, performs both as Hijra cultural norms as well as public expectations of Hijra performativity. There is a materiality to this performance. If you see, this citationality and repetitive performance legitimizes membership in a historically instituted community context or in a life and allows Hijra earnings and livelihood in terms of begging, badhai, and ritualistic performances. This income generation in turn makes Hijra life sustainable amidst multiple marginalities and vulnerabilities. However, beyond public and communitarian gazes, Hijra persons also relaxes, comes to mundane, thinks, reflects on the present and the future, critiques the state and governance, jokes, creates moments of humor and laughter, and ruminates on the hypocrisies of the mainstream. As in our paper on Hijra and their Tali, a Hijra sister tells us about the hollowness of governmental initiative to mainstream Hijras by offering loans of 1 or 2 lakhs. And she says, we can earn this much in 2 days through clapping and begging. Why should we accept a loan of 1 or 2 lakhs and repay it and set up our enterprise? So there is a life led through performatives and beyond performative, like any human society and community, as Irving Goffman would surmise. But in a heterosexist social order, the Hijra constitute the other through their sartoriality, manners, and rituals. They become abjected subjects and antinorm. So, in our understanding, sorry, they stabilize and destabilize both the identities. There is a front and there is a back to their performativity and existence, as in any other life context, if you see. So, I will try to sort of answer in this way to this question. It is both stable as well as it also destabilizes the heteronormative, heterosexist assumptions and imagination. But it stabilizes as an identity which has certain purpose, certain functions, and it makes life sustainable to the Hijra community.
This question is to you, Sayantan. Do you see tensions between community-based identities like the Hijras and the increasingly NGOized, rights-based LGBTQ plus discourse in India?
Thank you, Rituparna and Dipali, and to Doing Sociology for having me here. And thank you for that question. It's a very important question that I think gender and sexuality studies scholars, especially those who are looking at queer and transgender communities in India, have been trying to think about for some time now. And I think, of course, there is a tension. There's no way of denying that. So let me try and articulate a couple of points where we see those tensions emerge. And I think one of the well recounted early tensions that was documented is the fact that many of the NGOs that came up in the wake of the HIV/AIDS intervention programs that came in the country, many of them employed or recruited Hijra folks as the ground workers, people who would go from street to street, on the railway stations, on sex work sites, etc., to do awareness building, distribute condoms, etc. And they were not paid very well. They worked in relatively harsher conditions. And that was one of the tensions that was recounted, that okay, what does it mean to be running an NGO with a certain transnational global funding, which is still recruiting one of the most marginalized gender communities in the country to do, this grunt work of that an NGO is supposed to do. I think since then the nature of this tension, we have some more idea about it, especially when it comes to the question of rights and rights-based discourse. So, for example, if one takes the Nalsa versus Union of India judgment 2014, which is hailed as a landmark moment in the legal reform concerning transgender people in India, Pushpesh and I have actually written about the Nalsa judgment multiple times, and we've studied it in quite some detail. One of the things that we see is this, idea of creating this third gender that the state can recognize. And even though the Hijras are mentioned in the judgment as one of the groups that falls under this third gender / transgender umbrella, when we actually speak to a lot of Hijra folks, many of them do not agree to be called as transgender women. Many of them insist that to be a Hijra is to be different from what it means to be a transgender woman. And I think the rights-based discourse is trying to assimilate these cultural identities into this larger global category that can be understood by the state, that can be understood by the civil society, that can be understood by law and policy, that can be understood not on a more global context. And I think this leads to something called hermeneutic injustice, that we have to transform ourselves, our narratives, our stories, our experiences into something that can be understood by the factors that I mentioned earlier: the state, the civil society, etc., etc. The other thing that we see is the question of respect that keeps coming up. I think Liz Mount has recorded this. I've seen this in the science institutes where I've done my field work. That um, that more recently, and thanks to the rights-based discourse, thanks to the NGOization of the queer and trans discourse in the country, there is this figure of the middle class new transgender woman that is emerging, that is English speaking, that is located in an urban center, that is trying to get into the corporate workforce, that adheres to a certain middle class respectability. And like Liz Mount's work in Bangalore shows, they are trying to distance themselves from the Hijra figure that they see as more disrespectable, more crass, more let's say rustic. And I think that is a kind of rupture that we are noticing in transformations in the country. The other thing that I think comes to my mind when I think about tensions is the idea of whose narratives are considered authentic. Many Hijra women who worked with NGOs, who started NGOs, who run NGOs, because they get sort of more public visibility, some more platform, it so happens that their narratives end up being recounted as the authentic version of the Hijra experience. And because Pushpesh and I mostly work with Hijra folks who are not so-called celebrities or superstars, we work with Hijra folks who are very grassroots, embedded in the Hijra cultures, not even in the capital cities all the time. So their narratives, for example, just never come up in the larger conversation. Their narratives do not fit the linear progression of the more popular narratives about trans people's lives that we see. Living in um, great difficulty, then finding some rooting, and then emerging as a substantial change maker. Their lives don't fit this linear narrative, and for some reason, their narratives of being Hijras are then not even discussed, not even brought into the conversation. They are not seen as an authentic representation of Hijrahood. So, and that of course leads us to a larger question of whose rights are then being represented. If these NGOs and if the larger queer discourses talking about certain rights, like Pushpesh was saying, the right to be recognized by the state, the right to have support systems from the state, those are the kind of questions that we keep coming in. coming into when we work with queer and transgender people in the country, but the right to be able to clap without being villainized and criminalized for it, which is something that our participants, our interlocutors keep mentioning in our interviews. That is not a conversation that we are yet able to have in activist spaces, in the larger gender and sexuality studies discourse. And I think part of the intervention that we are making through our paper is to record this as a demand. The record, this idea that okay, the whole society and many middle class or quote unquote respectable queer and transgender people see the clap as something that is a disrespectable phenomena, something that is violent, something that is abusive, something that is not something that people should not be doing. And our Hijra interlocutors say that why should we not? We demand the right to clap, and we demand the right to clap with respect. We demand the right to clap without being criminalized and villainized for it. And I think that for us is a very revealing moment about where the Hijra body, the Hijra subject, is placed in contemporary queer and transgender politics. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for that. I think it shows the disconnect between the policy and the grassroots. So, the next question is about, interrelated to this, that how do caste, class, and regional locations intersect with what we would see as queer and transgender identities?
Yeah, thank you for this very interesting question. And I think I will answer this in continuation with what Sayantan was talking about, the certain grassroots identities and certain grassroots communities, even within trans and queer. So, in our understanding, it is the lower middle, poor class, gender non-conforming, quote unquote, biologically males who mostly join Hijra and Kothi community. The better off classes take modern transgender identity, which Sayantan has also highlighted, or genderqueer, non-binary trans identities, and distance themselves from Hijra and Kothi culture. This is what Sayantan has also talked about. Post NALSA, post Supreme Court verdict in 2014, uh, transgender communities, particularly those coming from Dalit background, if you see, they highlight caste operating even within transgender context and community. And there is one Dalit trans right activist, Grace Bano. She's also a trans feminine person and was able to sort of enter into an engineering college spaces where she could acquire an engineering degree, and she's the first one to do that in India. So Grace Vano is a Dalit trans woman and first trans feminine engineer, it is claimed, that she's in India, has shared many experiences of caste both outside the community context as well as inside the community context. There is a demand for both vertical reservation for transgender communities and also the horizontal reservation based on caste identity, particularly. The state is, however, unwilling to extend reservation to the community despite the Supreme Court verdict emphasizing on it. So these are the caste class issues which is configuring within the community context, as well as those who are Dalit, they face discrimination even outside the community. And also inside the community, they are facing discrimination and they are mobilizing from within. So they come together, but they also mobilize for themselves based on their intersectional identities. So, as far as regional variations you have asked, so there are commonalities across the region if you talk about Hijra identity and how it is performed. But there are one may notice the regional variation in terms of language, the language they speak, religious practices, sartoriality sometimes. In Kerala, for example, if you see, there is no term like Hijra, and even the trans identity is is very, very recent that people have started using trans identity. In Tamil Nadu, they are called Thirunangai, and there are certain different cultural practices which differs from the Hijra community. In Manipur, you have Nupi Manavi or Nupi Manavi, whatever they are called, who have been part of a traditional theater performances called Sumang Leela, right? In Telangana, if you see, you have certain gender transgressive male also take on an identity which is called Sibi Shakti. And as Shiv Shaktis, they are also engaged in shamanistic practices, healing practices, and procrastination. And they are specially entitled to carry food to gods and goddesses, ritual food to gods and goddesses, and that is one performances which fetches them certain income, certain living, etc. Many of them are even heterosexually married, right? So this is called bonum. The ritual food is called bonum, and the performance is called bonalu. So there are a lot of bonalu performances which start in specific months in Telangana, and Shivashakti identity is very, very spectacularized in those moments, right? And they also earn through their healings practices, their shamanistic practices, and they also prognosticate, sorry, procrastinate. So these are some of the ways in which different regions may show differences in how the identity is performed, played out, etc. But there could be overlaps and there could be similarities in certain ways in which you can visualize or you can see Hijra culture, how it is instituted and how it is practiced. Right.
Right. So, your recent paper basically, is titled "We Will Keep Clapping Till the End: Hijra Narratives on Their Tali," and you use the tali as the entry point. So, could you talk a little bit about that?
Should I say or should Sayantan you want to?
No, Pushpesh, you go ahead and I'll join you.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. I have grown hearing that Hijras are loud and create commotions, public commotions for extracting money. And this is a very common belief among the middle class, upper caste communities or classes in India. Uh, so this gives the community a bad name and also criminalize them. We wanted to understand this through the Hijra narratives to demythologize this whole idea and popular perception. And it appeared through the narratives that Tali was only earlier, there's a history to this Tali. It was earlier confined to communicate command and order of the Hijra gurus or Nayaks, who are the heads of a Haveli, Hijra Haveli. And it was used, clap was used in many intra community contexts. When Hijras, for example, are recruiting a new member in the community, there is a mass clapping again within intra-community context, and there are many other examples. We have talked about Billa Tali. One of the there are varieties of talis within Hijra community, and one of them is Billa Tali, which is associated with intra-community fights, right? And Billa Tali is directed at inflicting humiliation and insult to each other or your enemy. So, so Tali is also meant to alert a junior member who is deviating from prescribed community norms to discipline a junior member of the community. But the members of the community also reiterate its economic function. That Tali also performs an economic function in the life of, or certain economic functions in the life of the community. So one of the Hijra sisters told us that Tali in begging context is alerting the public that Hijras have arrived. And people keep 10 rupees note or 20 rupees note ready. And hence Tali is associated with pecuniary aspects of Hijra existence. Collective tali also become a defense when Hijra face or anticipate any threat or violence, and they use it to intimidate the opponents or the enemies. They are also used to alert certain co-sex workers on a sex worker spot when they perceive any police raid or threat or danger, and they flee the spot, they run away for safety, they hide themselves. So I think Tali is a way of life and has become integral to the Hijra community. So Sayantan might highlight that how from a very internal thing to the community, when only it was used to discipline, command, and communicate certain things, how it also becomes a public performances, and what way it operates as an as a tool to earn livelihood, as a tool to survive in this very harsh heterosexist world order, right? So I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Pushpesh, and thank you for bringing me into this conversation as well. I think Pushpesh has covered a lot of ground in terms of the different aspects of Tali that we feature or that we are able to document in the paper. Of course, I think one of the things that we see is that the tali is in some ways embodied oral manifestation of what the hijras keep recounting as haq, or a right to livelihood, a right to perform badhai, which are these congratulatory performances when newborns are welcomed into households, or when they are uh, or the right to gather money, seek alms on trains and in traffic signals. Much of this is articulated as a right, a haq, and not in the terms that we imagine. We think of hijras as begging on the trains. We use the term begging to talk about hijras, seeking alms on, let's say, street signals. But the Hijras articulate that as a right, and this is something that's also been documented by this person called Vaibhav Saria, who's done an ethnography of the Hijras in Odisha. So part of this is that the Tali exists not just within the Hijra life world, but also in what we've called the interactional world, which is this liminal moment where the Hijras meet and interact with the larger normative public, embed them into the local economy, and at the end of these performances, sort of go back to being the marginalized, ostracized other, so to say. But what was interesting for us is, given how ubiquitous the Tali is among the Hijras, to the point where it is a quintessential marker. Like, you think of Hijra, and one of the first things that comes to somebody's mind is the clap. We found quite some disagreement about what Pushpesh was saying. This use of the tali outside its historical community norms, and we saw that a lot of our respondents, our interlocutors, our Hijra friends expressed a lot of discomfort and anger around why is the tali being used outside the Haveli context? Why is the tali being used by Hijras who engage in sex work? Because why is the tali used by Hijras who participate in quote unquote begging? And um, and many of those people who expressed this discomfort were using terms like profanity to refer to such uses of the tali outside the Haveli context, and it appears then that there is this notion of respectability that's also entered this practice. That okay, if you use it in non Haveli context, if you use it for occupations like sex work, if you use it while seeking alms, which are seen as dirty occupations, seen as profane occupations, even by let's say Hijra people who are associated with the traditional gharanas that deem themselves very respectable, then then that use is itself seen as a very disrespectable use of the tali. So the tali also became an entry point for us to trace changes in this community's mobilization, in the community's organization, and reveal in some ways tensions within. Again, a project that's been very close to Pushpesh in my heart. We've been doing this through different projects, is tracing contemporary community formations of gender and sexually transgressive groups in India. And the Tali for us emerged very interestingly as an entry point into the changing community dynamics of the Hijras, which I think was a very interesting finding, something that we were not expecting and we chanced upon. And we've recorded this in our paper, which means there is, I think, quite some this inspires us to look at practices that we don't pay attention to as gender and sexuality studies scholars. Something like the Tali that is so ubiquitous. There are 3 full-length monographs on the Hijras. There are multiple papers, hundreds that have been written by the Hijras, and yet, um, to our knowledge, this is the first time that this gesture itself has been documented in the detail that we have done that. And that means we as gender and sexuality studies scholars are also taking some practices, some gestures, some everydays of these communities as granted. And we're not looking at them as epistemic activities that can give us new knowledge about contemporary queer and transformations, and I think that is a project that I'll urge more people to take up going ahead.
Yeah, so there have been studies where ethnographic studies as well where people have tried to mention it in passing, but we hardly come across a study which has tried to foreground it and try to understand the world, the inner world, as well as the interactional spaces outside that inner world in terms of or by foregrounding the Tali itself and what does it mean to the community, etc.
Right, that's very interesting, and that sort of also brings us to the next question, which is addressed to you, Sayantan. Your paper foregrounds narrative and lived experience, and why did you choose ethnographic or narrative methods over, say, the survey-based or policy analysis approaches?
Thanks, Dipali. That's a very interesting question, because we've used surveys in the past, we've used policy analysis methods in the past. Like, for example, when Pushpesh and I were tracking post legal reform India, which is, we use that term to refer to the time after the Nalsa judgment and the Nafted judgment, Section 377's reading down. We have looked at the policies that emerged in the wake of these judgments and what these policies reveal about how these lawmakers and policymakers and the judges see queer and trans people as. Um, I have used surveys in my past work where I've been trying to understand the lived experiences of queer, trans, and intersex people um, in Indian science ecosystem. But when it comes to understanding the everyday of a gender and sexually marginalized group, when it comes to understanding their lived experiences, and not just record their lived experiences, but also try and understand how they are making sense of that lived experience. I think policy analysis or surveys don't yield, the kind of depth that we require to understand this. I'll give you an example. For example, Pushpesh and I were trying to understand the origins of the Tali, right? Like it was an interesting thought. We thought, okay, at what point did this peculiar or unique, let's say, gesture emerge within the community and become embedded and embodied in its everyday? And we went around asking, we tried to read what historians have written about the Hijra subcultures, and we didn't find, at least in our research, some archival record that can explain the origins of the Tali. And so we asked our respondents, and our respondents often relied on myth making to make sense of the origins of the Tali and how ubiquitous it is in the community. Somebody said that, okay, the Tali emerged when the kings of the Nizamiyat would go for battles, and the Hijras were recruited to bless them, and as a form of blessing, the three talis in succession emerged as a form of blessing. Um, and but on the other hand, some other respondents said that, oh, okay, as long as there was Mughal rule in India, the Hijras enjoyed a lot of patronage, so there was no need for them to clap in order to make money, and therefore there was no clapping at that point. But only after the British rule criminalized the Hijras, clapping emerged as a form of asserting your divinity. Clapping emerged as a form of asserting your right. And so here you see two contrasting narratives. Like, one person is saying that the clap emerged from a position of patronage, from a position that is not marginalized. And the other person is saying that the Tali emerged when the Hijras were marginalized. And we were trying to, and of course, there was no way for us to really identify which of these narratives is true, whether both are true, whether there is. So we are calling this myth making, but what we did realize is that myth making was a way of sense making for the community. And I don't think we would have been able to arrive at these insights by doing surveys or by studying policy. I think for this, one has to take a narrative approach, one has to take an ethnographic approach where you are letting the community narrate their experiences, um, their confrontations, their negotiations, and the way they have processed it. And they are relying on the stories that they have heard from their gurus, their seniors, their sisters, other community members, which gives us these very rich record of not just their everydays, but also the ways, the stories, and the mythologies that they are invoking within the community to make sense of their practices. So I think that would be my answer. That the kind of information and data and stories that we required would just not have come from doing large scale surveys or doing policy analysis. This required us to stop thinking about sample size in some sense, but really think about how deep can we engage with our interviewees. And that was one part of it. We did several very long, detailed interviews, but we also drew upon these years, almost decade long engagement that we have had with our Hijra friends and sisters um, for just about a decade. And we've been very closely embedded in the Hijra subculture as friends, and as activists, sometimes as researchers. And for us, then, these positions, these identities of, as being a researcher, being an activist, or being a friend, they've also blended into each other very, very well. I know we can talk about accessing and interpreting this data a little later, but I'm saying that this is an ethnography for sure, but this is also an ethnography that is coming from a position of care and a position of just being embedded in this community, more than just being researchers. That has been fundamental to the kind of insights that we've been able to generate.
So, are there any methodological challenges of researching a marginalized community? Maybe, Professor Pushpesh Kumar could answer that question.
Yeah, thank you, Rituparna, for this asking this question. I think researching any community poses certain challenges, right? But the research process tends to become interesting and sort of trouble free once you are able to mingle with the subjects, as Sayantan also said, right? So our long association with this community, Hijra and trans communities in Hyderabad and for Sayantan many other cities. I have been inviting them to my classrooms. They have been coming and addressing our students. In 2014, I mean 2011, I migrated to University of Hyderabad. In 2014, I had introduced a course on sexuality. I have organized a national seminar on sexuality, and that was the first time when we had a hijra performance within that seminar. And everyone enjoyed it, cultural performance. And since then, I have been mingling with the community. Sometimes there is a crisis in the community, and we try to stand with them in some way, though very limited way. So these things have made the dialogic moment possible, and this is how one can navigate even within the context of a marginalized community, etc. And we have been consistently working on this issue, so consistently interacting with the community. And we own many friends uh, in Hyderabad and also we can say outside. This has enabled us to sail through while carrying out our interviews. So the association with we have also marched in the pride marches with them. Sometimes we're also invited to speak in their gatherings, etc. And sometimes they do the phone call and we listen to them. So listening itself also, creates a kind of empathy. So these are the ways one can navigate and negotiate to sort of uh, interact with the community, create a dialogic space, and try to understand and engage. And through this understanding and engagement, one can come up with certain beautiful stories of the community life, stories of joy, stories of excitement, stories of marginality, stories of vulnerabilities, and how the community makes sense of that and how the community navigate through that, and what makes that life possible even in a very very in a context which is not good to an outsider. So this is how I will suggest that a long association, a kind of empathy which the friendship creates, uh, which the concerns and care, as Sayantan said, creates, is very, very important in qualitative method. And of course, our research is grounded in certain qualitative methods and qualitative understanding. Yeah.
So, as we are moving towards the end of the interview, some more methodological questions. How did you navigate questions of positionality during the fieldwork? In what ways did your own identity shape the access, trust, or interpretation?
I think Sayantan would like to.
I
Answer that. Yeah, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I can take this, and then Pushpesh, if you have something to add, please do.
Right.
So of course the question of positionality is super important. The thing is, I am queer and trans, but like I was saying, one of the things that's really worked for us, and we try to keep that in mind when we do the research that we do, is that we go back to the networks that we're embedded in. We 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 are not people who've come to do a study on the Hijras, publish a paper, and get out of that network. Like Pushpesh was saying, we go into their gatherings, they come into our universities, um, we engage with them beyond research context. Really, I mean, if there's a Bonalu happening, we've been invited to that Bonalu. If there is a trip happening, sometimes we've gone to the trip. We've been called by our Hijra friends to just rant about life. Sometimes they are seeking help, sometimes we are seeking help. So I think that kind of exchange beyond the research context has really helped us, access in some sense the community, but also has built a relationship of trust that is not just them trusting us, but also us trusting them. We know that if we go to this person, this person, this person, they will engage with our research, they will engage with our questions, and they will, give us something to go ahead on. The other thing that we've always tried to prioritize is think about what questions matter to our interlocutors. The fact that, like you were right when you asked earlier that many people, gender and sexuality studies scholars in the India are concerned about policy, rightly so, but at the same time, when we speak to our Hijra friends, their concerns are often more everyday. They are speaking about the tali as a very embedded act, and they are asking for the right to clap without being criminalized and villainized for it. And that was one of the motivations for this project. It came because we were in a conversation with some of our Hijra friends in Hyderabad who said that we will keep clapping till the end. Whoever asks us to stop, for whatever reason, we will not. And that's also the title of our paper. So we are trying to also develop projects out of conversations, informal conversations that we are having with our Hijra friends and colleagues. In fact, in the past, we've also, had Hijra friends work with us as researchers on projects. I know Pushpesh has certainly led this endeavor more than once. So okay. I mean, I think I've spoken a lot. I just want to summarize by saying that when gender and sexuality studies scholars and probably qualitative researchers think about fieldwork, they often create this us and them. And once you create this us and them, you create this distance, and then you exaggerate this distance and try to negotiate that by things like positionality. We've been trying to avoid, that us and them discourse as far as possible. We are trying to think of ourselves as chroniclers. We are also trying to think of ourselves as people with a certain privilege and access to academia, English scholarship, etc., that can foreground voices that are otherwise ignored in such scholarship. We are thinking of everyday lives of the Hijras as epistemological spaces that can produce new knowledge about gender, sexuality, gendered living in contemporary India. So we also don't want to think of ourselves as the only interpreters of their stories. I think many of the things that are interpretations, I think, are coming from the community itself. And I was talking about myth making as sense making just a while below, and we're trying to be faithful to those interpretations as well. We don't always agree with some of those interpretations, and we've tried to make those clear in our writings in the past in this paper. But we do think of our research as a dialogic activity that is constantly happening with the community. And I think that is my answer. Pushpesh, if you want to add something.
No, I think you have answered it quite precisely. So maybe we can go to the other question.
Yes, we have one final question, which is that there is a lot of interest in queer studies, sexuality studies now. So, what kind of methodological, takeaways or lessons, if any, that you'd like to offer to younger people who are trying to sort of, start their research work?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Okay. So I think in our understanding, there is no one way of approaching any community you wish to study and engage with. It is a kind of research question one is asking, or one poses, the purpose of research and the time available to a researcher that would direct the choice of method and analytical frame which an individual researcher chooses to use, I think. I go here by Ben Flipzerg. There is a book by Ben Flipzerg called Making Social Science Matter. And in this book, he talks about the intuitive research. So we have to do the research intuitively, and he says that's a higher level of research. If you do research intuitively rather than a very structured, designed way of doing it. So sometimes if you do it intuitively, that is a beautiful research, he's saying. So through rigorous practices, a researcher is able to intuitively choose different theories and concepts, tweak them to relate to the context, right? Uh, we have used Sara Ahmed, for example, Sara Ahmed's queer phenomenology in this article, as she suggests in this work how our bodies are disoriented or oriented to act in certain ways in certain spaces. And when I say spaces, space doesn't mean necessarily a physical space, physical place, right? It may be through interactional of Tali and how they are interacting with the outer world. Certain space is created and then body is oriented to act in certain ways in that speciality, right? So Sara Ahmad also became fascinating for us because Sara Ahmad brings a very nuanced understanding of her own positioning as a migrant to different countries with her racial and ethnic background, and she herself is a queer. She brings this complex subjectivity in her theorization, and I feel that her understanding comes somewhat close to what we were trying to do. How body is oriented, how Hijra body is oriented to clap, in what kind of spaces, and how that space is created, and in turn, that space engenders certain kind of bodily acts, right? So I think it is a very creative, the qualitative method, the qualitative way of engaging with the subject is a very creative method, and there is no cut and dried formula for that. So I think with practice and intuitively doing research, I suggest everyone to read Ben Flipzerg's Making Social Science Matter, and how he's trying to talk about different ways in which sociologists, anthropologists, social scientists, historians have tried to engage with the idea of power, for example. And then one can pick and choose and make one's own framework of understanding and tweak it to the local context, the context one is investigating. So in our understanding and through this paper we have learned that it's a very creative act of engaging with the subject, and there's no formula, cut and dried formula for this creative engagement, I think. So Ben Flipzerg, and if somebody is understanding, I must prescribe the works of Sarah Ahmed one should engage with. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Sayantan, would you like to add something?
Sure. I mean, that was a great answer, Pushpesh. I think, okay, I'm slightly, hesitant to answer this in the sense that my initial training wasn't in the social sciences. I'm trained in neuroscience and biology for the most part of my life. But I think I was very keen on, I, Geeta Chadha talks about the sociological self, and I think at some point I was very keen on inculcating one. Saw a lot of merit in the methods of sociology, and I was very lucky to have a mentor like Pushpesh who
Oh, oh.
just allowed me to accompany him on a lot of field work, which made field work very visible to me. I hear so many of my friends in sociology talk about nobody teaching them how to do field work, something that you just pick up uh, just by virtue of your training. Some voice from above teaches you how to do that. I was very lucky in that way that I could just accompany Pushpesh and just observe a lot of how things are happening in fieldwork. Um, so my answer will not be as clear as Pushpesh's, but all I can say is that I think one way of making social sciences matter is to ensure that we are doing social sciences from our hearts. We are trying to ask questions that matter to us. We are trying to ask questions that matter to the communities and networks that we are embedded in. And we are coming at social sciences from a position of care, which is something that I think about a lot these days. I think we need to think about social sciences that have real implications in the world. It changes worldviews, it might have policy impacts, etc., etc. But I think the most important intervention that social sciences can do is it can bring the human into what is written and what is circulated, and which is why my advice would be to just think about what is at stake in your research. Like, what happens if I do not do this study? Why? It's not just a matter of really, I mean, I know research proposals ask you to state something like importance of doing this study. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm trying to rephrase that, and think about what do we lose when we do not do a social science study. And I think articulating that will bring us much closer to the research that we are doing. And this is an exercise that I've started practicing. This comes from a friend called Madhura Lohokare, who's teaching at OP Jindal Global University. And that is where I've learned to think about what do I lose if I do not do this research, and what do I lose if I do not do this in the way that I'm doing it. And that's really changed how I think about social sciences now. And I would like to know later if people who are watching this, listening to us, find this exercise helpful. I think it's not a matter of justifying your research, but it's a matter of figuring out why this matters to the point where not doing it is a loss. And I think that is deeply changing for me, at least, as somebody who's an early career social science researcher still figuring things out, really.
Thank you, Sayantan. And with that, we come to an end of this conversation. I think it was very interesting as it brought two perspectives together, one of someone who is a senior professor and one who is an early career researcher, navigating our treacherous kind of, site. And we're really thankful for this conversation. And we'll also share the link to your paper so that more people can read it and take an interest in the matter. So thank you to both of you. We have also unfortunately faced a technical snag with Dipali, which is why she's here, she's listening but unable to speak. And thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Rituparna. Thank you, Dipali. Thank you, Sayantan.
Well, thank you very much, Pushpesh, Dipali, Rituparna, and to the Doing Sociology project itself. Because I'm still early career, I keep going back to your platform to learn so much about what is happening in sociology in India. And I again think about what would we lose if we did not have Doing Sociology in India. It's, for me, it's not a question of why Doing Sociology as a platform matters, but why was its absence not recognized much earlier, and why did a platform like that not exist
Thank
before?
you. That's very, very kind of you. We should sort of, brand it and use it as some sort of marketing strategy. But thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.